one area that I get asked a lot about, which is soaking grains and beans. So people are always kind of like, why do I soak beans? Why do I soak grains? You know, it takes so long. Actually a lot of really good reasons for why we do this process. One is this is a process of soaking beans and grains that we have seen through every single culture through their traditional cooking techniques. And lots of times I like to say, going back to what our ancestors did, they knew how to really get the most benefits out of different ingredients, right? They naturally did it before we had all of the science. And now we're kind of catching up, getting all the science. And we're like, oh, that's why they did that. So one of the main things with grains and beans is they actually can have a kind of substance in them called phytates. And that can prevent our bodies from being able to absorb all of the beautiful nutrients that are in them. So phytates are wonderful for storage. It's actually what allows these beautiful things to stay good for so long and that we can store them. But once we want to consume them, we actually want to reduce down the level of the phytates. And one of the best ways to do that is by soaking them. So another great thing about soaking is it makes them taste better, which I personally, anything that makes anything taste better, I'm all for. It also helps with digestibility because it can break down some of those harder areas in the beans and the grains. Now, a couple grains, well, one main grain that you really don't need to soak because a lot of that stuff has already been taken out is white rice. But besides that, the majority of the other grains, it is really great to soak them before cooking, but not necessary, right? You will get a lot of benefits from doing it, but if you don't have that time, you can still cook your grains without soaking it, and they're going to turn out great. This is just kind of that extra step with grains that you can take to really maximize the benefits from them. Whereas beans, except for lentils you can cook right away. You can still soak them, but you can start cooking them right away. All other beans, dried beans, not canned beans, right? You need to soak before cooking them to really help release a lot of these strong binders in them to really get a good cook on them. And it's just gonna make it cook faster and taste better and have a better consistency. So how do we actually do this? That's very important, right? So I like to soak things either in a mason jar that I have, or if I know that I'm gonna cook it right the next day, sometimes I'll soak it right in the pot. Sometimes I'll just soak it in a bowl and then drain it from there. So totally different options that you can do, whatever you have on hand. And they're going to be soaked, they're going to be left out overnight, and you just have to lightly cover them. So let's say that you have a mason jar, but you don't have the top of it. Really, even just, taking the top of a pot and putting it there to cover it is enough for it, right? It doesn't need to be tightly sealed. So we're going to put our beans in our jar. So I'm going to do a half a cup of the beans and a half a cup of the rice. Let me just measure this out. I'm going to do this right over here. Sorry. All right. So I have my beans. And then I'm gonna do rice. So I'm doing black rice, or it's called forbidden rice. It's one of my favorites to eat, and it has a really beautiful, nutty, earthy flavor to it. So I'm gonna measure a half a cup of that. And if you guys wanna see what it looks like, really nice, beautiful color. And one of the main things with this is using warm water. So it doesn't have to be boiling, but you do want it to be warm. And mainly that kind of starts that opening process. And so I'm gonna add 3 times the amount. So I'm gonna add a cup and a half. And the reason why I'm adding so much water is as these soak, they're really going to expand, and we want to make sure that there's enough water there for it to keep soaking. It doesn't seem like it's going to take up all that water, but trust me, if you soak these for 24 hours and you come back, a lot of that water is going to be used up. So really good to kind of make sure that you use enough. Now, the other important part of soaking is using a tiny bit of acid. Now, the reason that we're using that acid is it actually helps the process of turning the composition of the phytates and breaking it down actually more into a composition that supports the absorption of those different nutrients. So the combination of the acid and the warm water working with it really has a beneficial effect on what our bodies are able to really get. So you can use any type of acid. And when I mean acid, you could use citrus, right? You could use a little bit of lemon. You could use some vinegar if you have that there. You can even actually use like whey that comes off of yogurt, or a little bit of yogurt, because yogurt's very acidic also, that part of it. So I really like to use lemon because I really love the flavor of lemon. So I'm just going to cut one there. And it's just 1/4 of a teaspoon, which you could even eyeball this. It's really like a nice little squeeze of some lemon, and then a little squeeze of lemon. And then that's it. You're ready. You have them done. They're soaking. And sometimes I might shake it up a little bit. So you're just going to lightly cover it. I like to use my nice little pot cover. And then I just place them on my counter overnight. And then they're ready to be cooked the next day. So they can, after you set them overnight, if you're not going to cook them right away, put them in the fridge to just let them sit. But they do need to be cooked within 1 day of being soaked. So I want to show you what they actually start to look like by the power of TV, right? So if you want to move to the close up, yeah. So that's the black rice. And see how it's already started to open up and change color a little bit? That actually is a term called sprouting. So it means that those nutrients inside there have started to open up, and that's what kind of sprouted grains means. Also the same thing with beans. So if you want to see how much, look at how much water the beans took up. And it's expanded almost 3 times. It's crazy. I wish you could have seen how little beans was in here to start with. So that's really going to cut down the cooking time and just make them better overall. And then one of the most important parts of after you soak your beans and your grains is you want to drain them and rinse them really well. So this water that's in here, get rid of that water. You do not need it. And rinsing them is very, very important to kind of get all of that starchiness off of them. And then you can let them drain a little bit, and then they're ready to be cooked. So any questions about soaking beans or grains?
Yes, we do have a few questions. Do you need to soak when you cook the beans in a high pressure pot?
Right. So you don't necessarily need to soak them for the cooking process if you're going to cook them in like an Instapot or a pressure cooker. But the soaking process of the beans with that little bit of acid is still beneficial in the digestibility and the benefits you get from being able to pull more of those nutrients in. So I would say that it's kind of a 50-50 where you don't necessarily need to do it for the cooking process, but you may want to do it still just for the other benefits that you can get it.
Good to know. You mentioned covering the beans. Well, some of us haven't been covering them, but we've been soaking them. Is that okay? What are the benefits to covering them?
Yeah, I mean, I just cover it maybe because I live in New York City and I'm like, my windows are open a lot, so I'm just worried about things. But yeah, I mean, if you feel comfortable with like where you are, you don't have to cover it. You can leave it open. That's totally fine.
Got it. What do you recommend adding something like a bay leaf? Does a bay leaf help with digestion when you're soaking beans?
So I wouldn't actually usually add it while I'm soaking them, but I would add it while I'm cooking them because bay leaves, I mean, just like all other herbs and spices, have really great properties that help us digest, right? So I like to add it during that cooking process to really get all of that into the beans.
What about cooking beans in the same liquid that they're soaked in?
Yeah, so that is actually the biggest no-no, I would have to say. A lot of things I can go back and forth on, but that one is a big one.
Is it
So
like drinking
that,
your bath water or something?
yeah, exactly. Like you gotta get rid of it. It's not something that you want to use to cook in, mainly because it's this liquid that's been able to kind of break down all of these things that we don't want to take in. And so now it's out of the bean and it is in that liquid. So we want to get it as far away from the beans and the grains as possible, right? And use that nice fresh liquid to really kind of bring up those benefits.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple more now, and then we'll move some of these from this section to the end of our Q&A as well.
Okay.
Do you use less water or the same amount for cooking beans if you soaked them first?
So I actually, it kind of depends on what I'm making with it. So if I'm just going to be like cooking them and I might not be using all of that liquid, then I'll usually throw in about the same amount, right? I'll usually do 1 cup to 3 cups, or sometimes 4 cups. And it can also change depending on the bean. Different beans are going to kind of pull in more liquid. So I really recommend kind of looking that up before cooking them, because it's not an overarching thing of, 1 cup to 3 cups or 1 cup to 4 cups. Some are going to pull in more of that liquid. Now, if I'm making a specific thing where I want all that liquid to definitely be reduced, sometimes I will cut it down because the beans have already kind of started that cooking process or that opening process a little bit. And you can always add more liquid, right? So that's one thing to also pay attention to, is that if you're really trying to like cook a stew and you want it really nice and thick, you can start a little bit lower. And if you see that, oh my God, there's no more liquid left, you can always add a little bit more.
Okay. I'm going to combine these two. What is the ideal time, the ideal soaking time? You mentioned overnight. Is that what you would recommend? And what about soaking using baking soda in the water that you're soaking in?
So I've never actually done it with baking soda. I have heard some people have used that. I feel like it would probably do a similar thing of opening that up. I just always have found the, lemon, but any type of acidic form. So you could use a little bit, where actually baking soda might actually do the other thing, because lots of times baking soda is actually alkaline. Sorry. So it might not actually open it up. We might need to go more with the acidic form of it. So I would really stick to like using vinegar, using lemon, things like that, because one, they've been studied to really see that those kind of acidic forms really break down those phytates. So kind of sticking with that. The ideal soaking. So they've really seen that after 8 hours is when the maximum amount of those phytates really start to get broken down. So you could soak 8 hours and be done with it. I just personally like to go overnight because it's the easiest for me, because I do it before I go to bed and then I leave it. But if you maybe started in the morning time, you could stop right after 8 hours and then cook them at night if you want to.
Got it. I'm going to take one more, because this might be top of your mind, Ananda. Can you repeat the name of the compounds that are released during soaking?
Yes, they're called phytates.
Phytates.
Yeah.
And those are?
Huh?
And those are, what are the?
Yeah, so phytates are actually considered anti-nutrients. So they inhibit enzymes and they inhibit releasing of nutrients, which is a protector, right? So it actually helps these beans and these grains stay good and keep other things away from it, and we can store it for a really long time. But then it continues to do that if we consume it. So we don't really want to consume phytates, and that's what it releases. And so this soaking process actually of creating the warm water with the little bit of acid actually almost creates the same experience for them as if they were in soil. that warmth and the little bit of acidic environment. And that's what really allows, like if we planted a bean, right? Or if we planted a seed, right? Which grains are really lots of times seeds, that allows that sprouting to happen. And so we're kind of recreating that environment for the beans and grains to feel comfortable enough to be like, I'm happy, I can sprout, I can open up, right? And release those things.
That's so cool.